Life. A constant ebb and flow of good and bad experiences. We spend hours scrolling, watching perfect highlight reels of people's lives. I've been a storyteller for 9 years. I have yet to meet a person who hasn't had a dark shadow cast over their soul from staring death or trauma in the face, myself included. In sharing my experiences, I've gained tools for days when those shadows get a little too dark. I'm Paulina Bucka, and this is not your typical mental health podcast. We all have a story. It's time to start using yours for your revival. Our stories have a way of shaping and molding our lives. Some chapters are fun and memorable. Others are painful and bring lessons with them. But the true power in storytelling is it leaves you, the author, in charge of your own destiny. You can have one bad chapter and still create a kick-ass novel. You are the creator and you are the author of your life. The stories you tell become your genetic makeup. Use them as fuel to move you forward to your next chapter.
When you guys hear Kat's story, you're going to know. And then the room really did go quiet.
With her mighty story, Kat Coley got up on stage and spoke to hundreds of women about her rise, her fall, and her redemption.
While life was throwing these bombs at you, it didn't feel like you were going to make it, but you are here.
Absolutely, yes. I'm here, yay! I survived.
If you know me, you know I'm a sucker for a good story. Even more so if it's attached to someone who can honestly share their experience without sugarcoating a thing.
What revival looks like and the pain that you go through, I think, to getting to where you are today, to the happiness, to the success, to the accolades, you know.
I've now worked with Kat Coley on my own storytelling and the building blocks of my own business. She has a past, but it definitely does not define her. Please help me welcome Kat Coley.
I always say I don't sugarcoat my story, and I always say I don't share it for the shock and awe, but there is a shock and awe to the story. So basically, what I came on stage to say, and what I typically talk about, is my journey through rock bottom. I always say that I was like at 7 layers deep of my rock bottom, or my rock bottom had a basement, or several layers, at least several levels, and underneath there's an underground garage. There's a couple other storage facilities out there. Yeah, I had no idea that they built a bunker down there. But a lot of it was my own doing. So it was a lot of it, I always say, was self-inflicted. So there's situations, experiences, traumas where, things happen to you by means of somebody else. And a lot of this, of course, was caused by me and some poor decisions that I made. And by poor, I mean terrible, totally off the reservation type of decisions. And I was working for a company for a very long time, and I was stealing from the company. So I was embezzling from this company. And I say that now, oh, it was a major deal. And I kept the secret for a very long time. There is so many stories behind the stories when I talk about this, but I only have so much time to tell my story or tell the story that I can't go into the specifics of it. But just know that there was a lot going on behind the story and behind the scenes before it was revealed that I had been doing this, and I'd been hiding this for a very long time. That being said, doesn't excuse anything, regardless of how we got to the realization that this was all happening. And so I was, of course, approached and suspended. There was no denying what I had done. And I was absolutely just devastated, of course, and embarrassed, ashamed, the whole bit of when it was found out. And I escaped. I left the place where I was at. Actually, it's in Las Vegas. And I moved with my partner then to Southern California to try to escape everything that was happening, that my life crashing all around me. Everybody knew, of course, and word travels fast, when good things happen, and then word travels even faster, like lightning speed, when bad things happen, especially when it's so unexpected from somebody that you would never expect to be, doing any of those things. So I left and I moved, and of course it followed me, because the company that I was working for they were going to come after me, rightfully so. But the whole time that it took to do that, the whole investigation, the whole thing took nearly 3 years. And in that time frame, I had moved on with my life. This was always in the background. And of course, nobody knew. It was, a big secret that I kept from the place where I moved. But I had started a new life. I'd gotten married. I was a brand new mom. I was promoted to like this amazing job that I had, to like in the C-suite, and it was just absolutely amazing. But knowing that I had to answer to my past decisions, and so one day it all came to a head, and I came back to be sentenced for probation. And so I walked in scared, absolutely scared, but confident because my lawyer was confident, and confident because of all the things that kind of had happened leading up to this time. I went in at like 8 o'clock in the morning on a Monday morning, and I was sentenced to not probation, but sentenced to prison that day. There was no stopping, no collecting 200. No, it was straight to jail. And I did not come back for 19 months. So all of this was happening, like literally it happened in a span of an hour. So I walk in thinking I'm going to get probation, which was what was recommended. And typically in situations like this, especially since I have not been in trouble before, I had, no criminal history to speak of, not even a speeding ticket. The judge goes with the recommendation. That being said, I was made an example of course, but I had to pay my debt to society. And so that day I did not get that probation, and I was sent to prison. I spent a few weeks in jail and then was transferred to high-level security prison, all of which was so absolutely surreal. Again, literally, I was married. I was just gotten married, so I was barely like a year into my marriage, and my young daughter was just barely 1 year old. And so the mental health of all of this, the shock of all of this to the system, and trying to figure out, what do I do next? And how do I figure this out? So, you can imagine now I look at 19 months. So my sentence was 19 to 48 months. So I could have been gone any time in between there, from as little as 19 and as much as 48 months. And there's no guarantee of exactly when I was going to be coming home. And I tried everything that I possibly could while I was away to come home, unbeknownst to everybody. And the funny thing is, I had received some comments when I came home that it seemed as if I was just, like on a sabbatical, because I was writing letters to people and I was trying to stay as positive as I could. And because that was the only way, it was the only way that I could get through what I was going through. You're so isolated, you are very alone, and you just start to really realize that, this is the real deal, that this is no joke. I wasn't coming home. I was going to prison. I was, amongst, people that I had judged. I had no place in judging, but I had prejudged, prior to all of this, but I was we were all equals. And the realization also that everyone else has to continue with their life and your life stops. And there's this whole idea that, it's like when somebody passes away, and I know that you've had experience in this, and people's life they go on, right? So they go to the funeral, they may send some condolences, and they may, stick around for a week or two, and then they have to go on, like they can't stop, but you literally stop. Everything that you're doing stops. And it's so hard to fathom, because then you think, how can they be like going on vacation and laughing and doing this and going to family dinners while your life literally has stopped? And that was like the surreal part of it all, because my husband had to keep going to work. My daughter kept growing.
Right.
My family had to go on with their lives, and they would check in, of course, and I would check in, and there was, they were always thinking of me, but they could not stop. So there's always, and so and at that time, 19 months to me now is like that. I think about this past year and I'm like, wow, how quickly this past year is gone. But when you're on the other side of that, 19 months is incredibly long.
But it's 19 months also, Kat. Like it's 19 months of your privileges being taken away. It's 19 months of not seeing family, 19 months of not being in your own bed, 19 months of not eating your own food, 19 months of not, I mean, sorry to be crass, but like pissing and shitting on your own toilet, like let's be real. So it
And
really is like you're forging,
your
a
life
completely new life for 19
stop.
months.
And 19 months of not being with my family and not being with my daughter and not being with my husband. And that was the most difficult part of it all. Was I missed, and there's still a huge sense of guilt on my end that I continue to deal with on a day-to-day basis, because I get reminded of things that I wasn't around for my daughter, her first step, her first words, all of those things I missed because I was away. And prior to her knowing, because I of course ended up I had to tell her, I needed to tell her, but I had to wait until she was a bit older so she can kind of understand all of it, the complexity of the story. But prior to that, then before I told her, she would ask me things like, "Oh, what was out of just nonchalantly, what were my first words? When did I start walking?" And I had to pretend like I didn't know, or I would sometimes like, I think I'm assuming it was Dada because he was the person that was around. It was probably not me. And also then my now ex-husband, but I'm sure there were other things that he was concerned about than trying to, writing down steps that or milestones that I would have missed. There was things that, he became a single parent overnight. And so, yeah, there's so many things. And so from a mental health standpoint, I had, of course, never been in this position, obviously, in my life. And also, I'd never been alone with myself, facing the reality of the situation that I put myself in my entire life. And this was a time where there were things that, I definitely contemplated. I had very much, a lot of suicidal thoughts, because of where I was at. And it was a constant, if I could just get through today, then I'll figure it out, maybe the next step tomorrow. And then I would plan for whatever it was I was planning for, however I was planning for it. It was different variations of how I thought it was going to happen. And then, of course, I wouldn't have the guts to do it. I wouldn't have the courage to go through with it. And then there was times where I had been in for 6 months, 8 months, maybe even a year, where I started to really think, well, no one's really going to miss me at this point. Like, people have gone on with their lives, obviously. I was the problem at the moment, for family and friends, and especially for my own family. And if I would just eliminate that, then yes, there'll be a time for mourning and a time, but most people are already used to me not being here anyways, seeing me, hearing from me, what would the difference be? And so I definitely contemplated all of those things. The guiding light, there was two guiding light, and it was my daughter. And the other one was my sister. I just could not bear leaving my sister alone. Those were the things that really kept me going. But the mental health, in prison, you can imagine there is no one there. There is no rehabilitation. There is no, there is no one to go to in those facilities. And you're just trying to survive. And you're just trying to stay out of anyone's way. You're just trying to put your head down. You're trying to focus all on you, trying not to get caught up in the drama of what life is like inside. And so there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of things that you have to fight for internally. And it was an internal fight on a day-to-day basis. I don't talk a lot about my time in prison. It's not the story that I focus on. And quite honestly, a lot of it I have erased from my memory. You just go into one of those, situations when you're in when you're trauma, right? And there's just times, I'm sure if I sat down and I really thought about it, I would remember, but I choose not to. All of that to say that I would not be here today. I would not be doing what I'm doing if it hadn't been obviously for my time there. And my time there, for the first time in my life, allowed me to look inward. And I'd never done that. I didn't even know what that was about. I didn't even know there was such a thing as that. It helped me realize, obviously, my faults, the decisions I had made that led me there. But it ultimately helped me realize that maybe there was a second chance. And if I were to get a second chance, what would that look like? And what would I do with that? I started to read a lot. So my time from prison, I was moved from different facilities. And again, I don't have a lot of I don't typically talk about this because there's not a lot of time to talk about all of this. But I was moved from different facilities because it was a non-violent, like white collar crime, basically.
Okay.
So I was moved. I had to go to maximum security prison because in the state that I was in, there is no medium. So you have to go through the system, and then you get recategorized once you're in there. So once you're there, you have you could apply for different places to go within the state system. And so from there, I went to camp, and from camp, I went to a community level facility where they housed both men and women, and you actually worked. You went out and worked, and you came home. You had no electronics or cell phone. You couldn't be around your family or friends. You just had to, you went to work and you came home, or you volunteered. Actually, you had to work, or then in your downtime you could volunteer, which I did, and I ended up volunteering for a secondhand store that was run by a church in the other side of town in Henderson. Yeah, I know you're familiar with the area, so it's far away. So, and we had to take public transportation. So it would take me like 2 hours to get there. But every time that I had a day off from my work, I would volunteer. And one of the things that I did at this location, the facility was in a more rich side of town, I guess. And so they were donated a lot of books, like a ton of books. And so they had this room when I first got there, and it was just books everywhere. So I decided that I was going to organize it. And then I decided might as well read up on some of these things. And so I started to go through the books that were being donated. A lot of them were business books. A lot of them were spirituality books. And so I started diving into spirituality. Then I started reading books about neuroplasticity, which are things I never even heard of. Manifestation, The Secret, like neurological things, neuroplasticity, psychological books. I mean, I just started to dive into it. And that was how I got through. I got to learn a lot about psychology, how the brain works, how we work as people. I learned about myself. And so I figured, I'm here. There's nothing more I could do with getting home. I did everything I could. I asked for, and again, nobody knew the things I did behind the scenes. I appealed my cases several times by myself. I asked for a new judge. I asked for a new trial. I asked for home confinement. I asked for everything that you could possibly think of that I could do on my own, using what little knowledge I had about the criminal system, and asking questions and going to the law library, which the prison had, and reading books about the law. I did all of that. And with the help of other people that were there that had gone through something very similar than I had. And people were wondering, why are you even here? What did you sign? What did you sign in your plea bargain? I had no idea what I signed in my plea bargain. I was shocked much later that my lawyer allowed me to sign the plea bargain that I did sign, because I did not know about the criminal system until I was in the criminal system. And I learned a lot. And there were things that I should have known, and I didn't, because I was too scared to ask the questions, and I just wanted it to go away.
You have to give yourself some grace there too, right? You don't know what you don't know until you know it. And,
Exactly.
Up until that point, like you said, you haven't even had a speeding ticket. You didn't know to look for X, Y, and Z. I think what's interesting about your story is that at no point, even when I heard you speaking on stage, and on stage, you didn't talk about any of this, right? You didn't talk about your time in prison.
I,
You didn't talk, there's no time, like you said. And
I 10
so
minutes.
over 10 minutes, that's it. And so it's great to kind of hear it now more. And I want to dive into that a little bit more. But one of the things that I gravitated towards you is that never in your story did you make it about like, I should have not been there, like you always took responsibility for what you did. Now, did you educate yourself about the criminal justice system later? Did you want to appeal to? Yes, of course, like you're human. You want to get out of this situation. You're paying your debts. But at all times, you not only are telling the truth, but you also are taking accountability for everything that you've done.
There was no doubt in my mind that I needed to be where I was at. There was, regardless of white collar, whether it was the biggest heist of the place I worked at, or it was the lowest crime. I made some really bad decisions, and I had to pay my debt to society. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. The funny thing about any time that I shared my story while I was inside, so I would share it with, because officers, probation officers, officers within would be like, "What are you doing here?" Because they would read my case and they'd be like, "Wow, the thing that they would say is, you stole from the wrong people." And I get that, regardless of who you steal from, it doesn't really matter, but I definitely stole from the wrong people. They would say things like, I'd be in your same position too if I had gotten caught. And I don't know how many times people have told me that they know somebody, maybe themselves, or, that, and in the beginning I thought, I know you're just saying that to make me feel better because I'm here where I'm at and you're kind of on the other side. But I really did start to feel like, when I would share that story, it started to allow, and this is while I was inside, and I would share the story, and I would, there was no hiding it again, and I wasn't going to hide it. I'm not going to lie about what got me there. It was there where people started to open up, and I'm talking again, officers, high ranking, people, and they would have no reason to tell me why they would need to tell me what they were talking about. Like, there's no reason to reveal that side of them. It allowed me to feel human while I was there. That interaction and that conversation, it allowed for me to appear human as well, as opposed to kind of this, the big gap of I'm here and they're here. It just really kind of leveled out. But but regardless if I looked at it, I really was, still a prisoner. I was still under the state, and I was still behind bars. But that being said, that was the first inkling for me where I was like, wow, well, I would say things like, well, thanks for telling me that. They're like, yeah, I don't know why I told you. I don't know why I said it. I don't know why. I'm like, and I was like, yeah. And so there was this comfort level. And that was that was the inkling, at least in the very beginning, for me to be like, well, it's okay for me to share the story. And I thought maybe it was just because I was inside and there was no hiding why, and then I figured that once I was out, once I came home, I would never talk about my story ever again. And that really was the case for some time. So I did come home 19 months to the day. I did everything I possibly could to come home 19 months to the day. And, very rare does that now. I don't know if it's how rare it happens, but the day after the 19th month is the day when I came home.
Generally, it's 3/4 of your sentence that you have to serve out before you're released, or you're eligible for release.
For parole, yes. That's absolutely true. But it depends on the level, the category that you're in. I signed, and I should never have signed the category that I was in, which basically meant whatever the minimum was, I had to stay. Had I signed even just one lower than that, I would have been eligible 3/4 in, or maybe even half in. And my crime, what I had done, they could have fought that, but there was no negotiation as to what that level is. They're going to be like, oh, that's a little too high. Let's do, whatever level this is. But I signed it not knowing. Well, despite all of that, I came home 19 months exactly. And I thought, okay, this was it. I had paid my debt to society. I can come back to my life. I can start, not over, but just continue on. This was a blip. It was a long blip. It was a hard blip, but it was a blip nonetheless. And I came home And I always said that I did not recognize life and it did not recognize me. It seemed like everything had shifted, everything had changed. I was there, but it felt like everyone around me was new and different. And that included my husband, who then asked for divorce the day after I came home. Um, my family, as excited as they were that I was home, just wanted me to move on with my life, never talk about this again, and rightfully so. Again, I'm not saying anything bad about that, um, because they just was like, you've done it, like let's just move on, and I did for some time. But then some of the people that I knew when I left asked, some who didn't know because I left so abruptly. I said I was going out of town and I was coming back the next day, and I didn't come back
for 19
for
months.
nearly 2 years. So, they're kind of wondering what happened in that time frame. I found myself lying again, trying to protect myself, trying to protect my family, trying to protect my ego, trying to just wish it all away. And then I started to realize, like, what am I lying? I feel like I'm back in it again. Like, I'd spent so much time while I was away, being open and honest about where I was at, not sugarcoating anything, not trying to fluff it or scale it up or scale it down. It just was, it was. And then I was back and I was like, oh, well, and so I was doing all of this again. And it felt like I was going back into the lies of my life, obviously what led me there. And I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I always felt like I wasn't 100%, of course. Like here I was saying, I'm going to get a second chance. I'm going to move through life. I'm going to, own up to this and take accountability. But then I wasn't being truthful when I was asked what happened or where have you been? Or, people who really didn't know, who had no idea and didn't really care and would just see me and be like, oh my God, it's been so long. What's going on? And I'm like, I didn't know what to say to that. I'm like, oh, they're like, oh, are you still at XYZ? And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to answer any of these things. And so I was like, then I felt fraudulent once again. Sure. And so what I did start to do again in that kind of time frame when I was like, okay, I'm going to start, I just want to not share my story. I just want to tell somebody else. Because I just, again, felt like I was in hiding. And so I did. And I was brave enough in this one situation to tell somebody that I felt like I had not had just met, but had met and been speaking to and that was cordial and was an acquaintance and, became friendly with. And I was really cautious as to who, I chose to be in my circle, of course. And I shared it. And it took me a really long time to even say the words and for it all to come out. And I started to share little bits and pieces. And from there, she was like, oh my God, you need to can you come to my little networking group? I was like, oh my God, no, I would never networking group. I would never share the story outside of you and I. And so, over dinner, I got the courage to share with the one or two other people there. And then from there, not knowing kind of the group of people that I was sharing my stories with, it became kind of this thing where I would just share. And the more I shared, the easier it became and the lighter I became. And it just felt like, okay, I can maybe just do this. I can really start to share. And little did I know that little bits and pieces of sharing would lead me to stages, would lead me to panels, would lead me to podcasts, would lead me to start my business about storytelling. I've always been a storyteller. I've always been told I tell great stories. I've always been told all of these things. I've just never told my own story in this way. And so it just kind of came full circle when I started my business and backed with my past experiences of marketing and sales and business development and all of these things, that storytelling really became the foundation of what I do now. And why I'm so adamant about sharing not just our experiences, not just the highlights of our lives, but really I always say it's the lowlights. That is what I'm interested in. I'm more interested in that than anything else. This whole time, it was a lot about figuring myself out. It was a lot about trusting my instincts and trusting my gut, but it was also a lot of pressure because there was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of resentment and embarrassment. And the more I shared, the less of those things I felt. And it became almost like a way for me to get out of the hole that I dug myself in. And it was freedom from the lies, the deceitful, all the deceit, all the lies, all the masks that I had put on, and showing up as me and accepting all of that. And I always, not always, but most 9 times out of 10, I lead with my story. Because if I'm not for you, I'm good for that. I'm good.
Yeah.
If I share my story and you're like, ugh, no, thank you, I'm good. And I know I've been asked, like, when you share your story, do you feel like you turn other people off? The trust and all that. I said, absolutely, of course. But I also turn people on. Like, I also, I'll focus on those people. And those are the people that I really want to share my stories with. What it allowed me to really do, when going back into when I was telling my story while I was inside and sharing it, is that it really gave others permission to share theirs. And that's really what I wanted. I wanted a safe space for people to come and share their stories as well. So, and so that's what I started to do when I came home.
Storytelling. I love it.
Storytelling.
So that is the storytelling is definitely what I gravitated towards with you. It was the honesty and it was the storytelling, because two hills that I will always die on is, I don't know, in my family, we were always taught the truth will always lead the way, and I think my parents instilled that in us, that they would rather us tell them the truth, the worst honest truth, because they know what to do with it. They know how to kind of navigate the truth, but they don't know how to navigate a lie, because the lies always come back, right? There's always something more that you have to lie about. There's something more that you have to cover up. There's something more you have to keep coming back to. Like you, 13 years ago, I was not a storyteller. That's it. Like, I was working in a hair salon. I was working at my mom's hair salon doing hair, makeup, and reception. And there was no plan or path for me to ever get into news. I was never looking to be a newscaster. I was never looking to be an anchor. I was never looking to be a storyteller. And then my dad's suicide happened. And I remember then saying, I know someday this will be my story. I just didn't know how that would happen. I didn't know when, how, why, and kind of in what capacity that would happen. And it took a long time. Unlike you, it wasn't, maybe a year or 2 or 3 before you started speaking. For me, it was 10 years before I told publicly people what I had been through, because 10 years prior, there were so many people in our small circle that knew what happened. And it was so overwhelming that I couldn't even think about bringing it to a bigger stage and being like, hey, let me open up the world to all my wounds and all my traumas and all my past and all my things. So I've never spent 19 months in prison. Okay. The only thing I can equate prison life to in my life was leaving my abusive marriage. It was for the first time leaving and feeling like I'm in the wilderness. And I remember that it was like a snowy, I've been driving 3 days from Kentucky to get back to New York. I like fled the state trying to get away from my ex. And I remember coming home and I remember saying to my mom, are you ready to hear my story now? Like, are you ready to listen to the last 3 years of my life? And it was like the floodgates opened of like all these, like you said, those lies and things that I had to keep covering up, the masks, when I got my black eye and my broken nose, I remember calling my boss and telling her I got into a car accident, because I couldn't fathom telling people that, I'm in the public light and here I am in a marriage and I'm getting the shit beat out of me, like, how do you even like confront that? Or there's a shame around that. So
Right.
there is a lot of
Absolutely.
shame. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of things in our stories that hold us back from talking about it until the dam breaks, right? And then you're kind of like navigating this wilderness.
It's a shame. It's a shame game, right?
Yeah.
Again, I always, even when I was on stage, when you heard me speak, I always say, even though, especially, I guess, when I do speak and I work with my clients, that mine was self-inflicted. And there's a lot of shame when it's your decision, right? When it's your decision that got you to, the places where you've been. But more so, and I find this just even more so when it's not self-inflicted, when the wrong has been done to you, how much shame you carry for somebody else's actions towards you,
Yeah. You
and how
do.
much and how much you feel responsibility for that person. And so in the telling of it, in the sharing of it, you almost feel as if you've allowed this to happen, and that's like that you allowed 3 years of of that relationship to become what it was. And there's so much shame in saying these things out loud, although obviously that's not true. You allowed none of that. I mean, that has nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with your partner. But there's so much shame in that, and I feel like we hold on to that so tightly sometimes, not sometimes, all the time. And the minute we start to let that go and start to separate ourselves from those situations or the experiences or the trauma that was brought onto us is when we can like exhale. And I'm sure you exhaled deeply when you got to your mom's house.
Yeah.
As hard and as difficult as that conversation was.
Well, yes and no. I feel like that first couple of months was, I mean, I was so broken in coming back, and I think my family wasn't prepared for what they kind of were dumped, like this broken me. Like I wasn't. I mean, I had left my job. I had, like left my marriage. I had left any income. I literally blew up my life and fled. And then I'm back at home in my brother's home on my mother's couch, with my dog. And I don't even have my own dresser, And so I'm very thankful to my family because they stepped up and they were incredible. And I know that some of it to them maybe was like, oh, she's so ungrateful. But I don't think I wasn't ungrateful. It's just like, there's so much at the same time that goes wrong in your life that you're just like, I don't know how to be alive right now, even, So I'm like, they weren't ready for the shitstorm, and I wasn't ready for the shitstorm that came from the aftermath of that either. And to go back to your point of like shame, I feel like yes, there was a lot of shame, but I did willingly stay, like I got married despite the multiple beatings I've gotten.
Right.
I got married despite X, Y, and Z. I got, and
I think because there's a sense in us that it'll change, right?
right.
It'll change once you're married. It'll change once you're in better financial situation. It'll change once he gets a new job or you get a new job or you move to a different city. It'll change. Like all of these things will change, and there's a level of commitment that you've made to each other, to yourself, to the situation, to never give up on the person that you love, blah blah blah. But yeah, like there's all of these there's all of these things of I could have, you're taking responsibility, and yes, you're taking accountability, but then you also put the blame on you,
Right.
because that's what you think most people are also going to think about you, right? Like 3 years, how could you endure 3 years? And then you reveal, okay, a lot of it was happening prior to the marriage, and it's so easy for somebody from the outside to go, oh, once that happens, I'm gone. And I'm sure you have seen and read some of those things in situations where you'll see people comment, the second, oh, I'm this person would not stay. And until you are in it, you don't know. And so you don't know what you don't know. Going back to what you're saying about when you came home and, you were absolutely broken in those first, yes, you breathed a sigh of relief having shared the story. When I first came home, my sister thank God for my sister again, my saving grace, but she was really, really worried about me because I came home and here I thought, again, I was going to come back to my life, and that's not what happened. And so, I had no money, I had no job, I had no place to live, I had no husband. And so it just felt like there was a time when I first came home in those first couple of weeks where I was like, I should have just left. because the reality of this now that I'm home is not what I had been dreaming about, thought about, all of those things that I thought was going to happen the minute I walked out that door, or, said goodbye to the prison bars, and I went into another set of bars. And my sister was like, I stopped eating. I didn't eat. I barely showered. I barely got out of bed. And she, was really worried. And I slept most of the day. So obviously I was in a state of depression and a state of, and then again, it was just this realization, like, I had been working up to come home, and this is what I came home to. And my life was a shell of what it was when I left. And I could not figure out how I would get from where I was at in my sister's guest room to where I'm at today. There's no step forward without my husband and my daughter and our family together, and a life and a job and a place to live. Any of these things, I could not put two and two together. I could not step forward. And I just felt, again, thinking about mental health and where I was at mental health at that time, I was like, I probably should have gone through with it, because this is hell. This is worse than when I was away. It felt like at that time. And I couldn't figure out how to get through the next day. And in that space, there was so much rebuilding. There was so much that I had to remember what I was fighting for, to stay alive, to stay, here, to stay on this side of the realm, to stay in this side of things, and to focus in on that. And that again was more going back to the things I had read. I reread the notebooks that I had, because I'd forgotten about all of that. I reread the notebooks, and I had to remind myself that, it was probably going to get harder before it got easier. And there definitely were many, many bumps and bruises along the way.
We connected during my rebuilding phase. It's a very different beast trying to unpack your own story and see which parts of your story make sense, which parts of your story don't make sense. And then there's a lot of unknowns in this, right? And I feel like most of the sessions me and you have done in the last 2-3 months that we've worked together, Kat, they're almost therapy sessions more than anything else, because it sometimes you don't have the will. Now, I talk a lot about, I prayed to get out of my situation at work. That Sunday I went into church and I said, God, like, please have them fire me, have them take me away. Whatever you do, just get me out of that place. Like, I feel like I'm back in my marriage. And then by Wednesday, which is the start of my work week, I was gone.
Done.
And I was like, okay, that was fast. Cool. So I remember walking out.
Like, okay, we're clear now. Okay,
we were unsure. I was like, okay, we're here. And I remember walking out and being like, now it's your time to work. And while there was freedom in that, and I accepted that and I embraced it fully, the first month was a lot of hustle and grinding, right? So it was, every day getting up at 6, going to bed at 2, getting up at 6, going to bed at 2. And that's just not like, that was my clock. And that's what at my speed I was, taking classes, reading, YouTube, this, that, like doing market research, networking. And then you get to like the first, second month and you're like, I'm getting like all these things done. And then you start hitting roadblocks. And like you right now in my journey, April was hard. April was really hard. And I had moments that brought me to my knees where I had to lean heavily on people and friends and be like, is this worth it? Is this life worth it? Is it? And it's not even like there's nothing relatively bad happening in my life. I'm just exhausted from having to constantly try and fight to keep it all together and to keep it all going some days.
And it's not, and again, it's, this entrepreneur world, it's not something that I would highly recommend to a lot of people. I wouldn't, if you have the passion to do things outside of the norm and you've got, yes, then, it's very rewarding, but it's very hard. And it is a very lonely journey. And there's so many things that you can only learn by doing and failing and learning. That's the only way that you do it. Like, I think you said it earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and that is basically entrepreneurship. You don't know what you don't know. And yes, you can have mentors, and I highly recommend them, and coaches, and I have them myself. Obviously you do too. But there's so much you can learn that way, and they can teach you in that way. And for you, it's figuring out what works best for you as an individual. But there is so much about entrepreneurship that no one can really teach you. And you do need a source, a group, a network of people that understand the journey. And because it's so isolating, sometimes you feel like you're the only person going through it. And I want to normalize that you're not. And I wish when I first started that this was more, spoken about. Now it is, like, the behind the scenes stuff is now, most is shown a bit more. Not to the extent that I think it needs to be, but also I want to normalize sharing our stories. I want to normalize, and that's part of that. This journey, what you're going through, someone who is just starting out, who's just one or two steps behind you, who's maybe still, where they're at a 9 to 5 or wherever they're at, and they're contemplating, is this a jump that I want to make, could see you and could see the things that you've struggled with, but also see the things that's working. But I want to see all sides of that. And that is all about what storytelling is about. There's a way in which to do that. And obviously your previous work as a news anchor, storytelling, that's literally what it is about, right? As a news anchor, that's it. Like, without storytelling, you're just nothing. It's nothing. You've got nothing.
There's no job.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's a difference when you're telling somebody else's story and when you start to tell yours. Like you said, there's a huge difference in trying to figure out, because we are so close to the source. We are so close to our story. We are living it day in, day out. And that's why when we start to share our stories and somebody says, "Oh my God, that's amazing," and you're just like, it's a Tuesday, and then you're like, tomorrow's another day. Because there's some people that are inspired by even what we think of as insignificant, because we've been through so much. Like, look at your own story, your path, and the things that you have been through. And you compare the 3 years that you were in your marriage and escaped it. And I'm sure there's a lot more stories behind that. You compare that also to your experience with your dad's suicide, like all of that. And then somebody talking about, being fired from work, which you have experience in, or being let go, being, or being laid off from work. And you're like, not a big deal compared to everything else. But to them, that story is significant. And it's figuring out for yourself which ones of your stories are the ones that are going to help propel your clients, inspire them, empower them, get them to take action, but also allows them to feel a level of comfort, a level of trust with you and what you're sharing, and figuring out a way to do that is a win-win for the both of you.
I kind of mentioned this, but you articulated it the way that I think I wasn't able to in any of the other episodes, where by the time the firing came, what was meant to be humiliating to me, I think to some degree, it wasn't, because I had been through so much before that this was just such a small little like potato in the big like drop of, big bucket of droplets. But in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't like my marriage, or it wasn't my dad's suicide that I want to say broke me. It was like this last month of just kind of having back to back episodes of like just things go wrong, and you just lay down on your ground, on your floor or in the grass like I do, and just cry, and you're like, God, you can take me now. I'm done. I hate this. I think I've done what I need to do. 33 years is enough. Like,
you're so like, I'm good.
Yeah, right. Like, I'm like, so it's not like the big things that sometimes break you. It is like, for me, yes, in the grand scheme of things, for me, this firing is so small, but it is also so pivotal in my life, because what it brought for me was 2 months of me talking to God. It was 2 months of me meditating. It was 2 months of really practicing and leaning into my healing. It was 2 months of me going to yoga, to somatic breathing, and doing all these practices and really diving deep into like my past traumas and saying, what part of me is keeping me stuck, that I need to keep moving forward and I need to keep moving past this season of life that I'm in. I'm welcoming the triggers. I'm welcoming the people in my life who are like, challenging me in a way that I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I still needed to work on that. And that growth, there's still so much of it, but it all starts with telling your story.
In that sense of what you're talking about, it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Right? It's not one knife wound, one large knife wound. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. And it's the little ones that really kind of bring you down, because you can handle, I think all of us are equipped to handle, major life traumas, that one big thing, a divorce, death, all of those things we're kind of equipped to kind of like, but it's when you start layering those things, those little tiny things, it doesn't have to be the big grandeur, like getting whatever, not getting the job, or getting laid off, or not getting the client, or, having, things happening, and, little things that on a normal day would not seem significant. It's like, it just layers and layers and layers. It's another cut, another cut, another cut, another cut, another cut, until you're just like on the floor, like you said, like, but I think a lot of it is when you start to share this, right? As you're sharing it with me, as you're sharing the journey with me, as recent as, what's been happening in the last, few weeks, it normalizes it, and it makes it okay. And it makes it like, I'm going to get through this, instead of keeping it in like we normally would do and try to internalize and try to figure things out on our own. You just have to vocalize it. You just have to say it out loud and know that somebody else, I understand exactly what that feels like. I know like what it was to go from like an absolute high to like the next day to like come crashing down, to get something, one day, and then all of a sudden it gets taken away, or something else takes it, whatever it may be, like, or, someone says yes, but the thing that you really wanted says no, or, whatever it may be. Like, it just is, that is part of this journey, and that is part of the up and down. And I don't think will ever change. The ebb and flow of what we do and all of this will never change. It'll just be, and I don't like to use the phrase, more money, more problems. It's just more, more money, more opportunity, for new learnings, for new beginnings, for new endings. That's all that is. In the sharing of our stories, it's allowing people to also share in the things that you're going through, and also gives, and when somebody shares and you're listening, it gives you permission to also share your struggles or your highs and your lows.
Absolutely.
Like, in all of it. Like, I think there's just so much that we as a society, we keep in for social acceptance, for validation, for whatever it is that we've been, we've gone through our lives to try to mask, to be liked, right? Like, that's literally our thing. It's like to be liked, to be part of a community, and in whatever way, shape, or form. And so we hide behind all these masks, all these facades, and it's nice to like take that off. It's nice to not have to hide behind, walls and pretending to be somebody that we aren't. And it's nice to say, I'm having a really fucked up day today and I don't want to deal. And I don't have to put on, a happy face for anyone. And that also has a lot to do with when we do things like, especially if you've come from, the situation that you've come from as in an abusive relationship, where you have to have a mask on
the whole time.
You have to pretend that everything is okay, even when it's not just for the people around you, but for the significant other, because anything that, that affects the mood, the energy, whatever it is. And so it's like a constant mask. for yourself, for other people, and especially in the line of work that you were in.
At least for myself, I know that I think there was a complete and total disconnection from my body, my soul, my mind, my being. And so when I started this podcast 3 years ago, I was very much, I don't know, I don't even know if I was looking for a community. I was just so tired of not talking about these stories, right? Like, I think that there were so many things happening around me and so many people were going through similar things that the more I started to open up, my mom would be like, she'd hear my story and be like, you need to talk to this person. You need to talk to this person. And then she'd connect me and we'd talk and we'd have the same exact, like, you know, story. And for the domestic abuse stories for me, I never sat down with domestic abuse victims as much as I did in the first season. And there were so many, there's an episode with Edgy Benson, and he talks about how he remembers the bone shattering in his hand, right? Like he remembers the bone, the sound of the bone breaking. And I remember the sound of my nose breaking between my ears. And I remember he said that. And I could go back to like that echo in my head and go like, shit, like this, people go through this. And for him, it was such a significant moment. But for me, it was like this giant, you know, portion of his story that was like, man, I can really relate to this. I really understand what he's going through. But the other part of that, Kat, is I find a lot of people, when I started speaking and we started the podcast, would approach me and say, are you not ashamed to talk about this? Like, are you not afraid to talk about, kind of the issues I had with my mom at the time, or the issues I had with my brother, like kind of airing out your dirty laundry. And I think that's how we get ourselves into these damn problems, by not airing out our damn laundry. Like, I wish we had aired out our dirty laundry more. Maybe my dad would be alive. If I had aired out my dirty laundry, maybe I would have, been out of my marriage 2.5 years earlier than I was versus, 3 years. Like, I wish sometimes that I had spoken up and aired out my laundry before I got to the point that it did.
Right. I think someone asked me that as well. Again, I think I may have mentioned it, like, doesn't sharing this story, if it, like, is it relevant? I mean, does everybody need to know? They say always, like, it almost feels like it's your identity, like the thing that, you're a felon or ex-felon, and it becomes your identity. And I said, it's not my identity. It's not who I am. It is a part of me, and it's a significant part of me. And whether I like it or not, whether I chose it for myself or not, it's a significant part of who I am today. I would not be who I am today, this version of me. There's different versions of all of us. I would not be this version of me had it not been for that time, had not been for that period, had it not been for that experience, had I not learned those lessons, had I not done what I had done. And so I don't want to hide behind what my life is right now. My life right now, I've got a great partner. I've got a wonderful daughter. I live in a beautiful home. I live by the beach. And I'm pretty lucky to be where I'm at. I have great clients. I'm doing the things I've always wanted to do. But I also want people to know that there's a path to this. There is struggle through all of this. Yes, like, am I embarrassed when I share my story sometimes? Of course. And regardless if it's a room of 2 people or a room of 200 or 2,000 people, of course, I know people are going to judge me. Of course, people think I, may glorify what I have done, and not in the least bit am I, glorifying, the things that I've done. But I also know that if I don't share that part of me, then I'm lying to myself and I'm lying to them. And especially, people are like, I don't want anyone to find out about me, especially like with my daughter as young as she is, through and take it out on her. Like, I don't want them to learn about me, not from me, and then hear through the grapevine or whatever it may be and be like, I want them to be like, I want you to make the decision. And if you're not comfortable, and that's fine, and that's great. But I don't want, that to be a reflection of towards my daughter or towards my family or anything like that. But I also, again, for me, if I'm saying I want you to share your stories, but I never share mine, that's that is unfair, and I know people may judge it, and I'm okay with that. I that is their prerogative. That is their own stories. That's their own experiences around it. Because a lot of times when I do share my story, there's some people in the audience who have family that have gone to prison, who have family that have done what I had done, and there is a sense of, you know, forgiveness or not, right? And when they hear my story and they see kind of this side of it, it may be a stepping stone for them to maybe try to engage in conversation or try to be understanding or not. Like it's completely up to them, and I'm completely okay with that.
Thanks for watching, and that's okay. Join us next week on Wednesday for another episode. In the meantime, subscribe below, like, comment, and share, or find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next week.